In 2016, something really unusual happened in these living communities. People are dying unexpectedly.
There were odd things like the victims lining up in a very straight line.
What he looked for was a vulnerable woman, somebody who he could easily overpower and control.
It took a really good investigator to see that, you should look for lipstick on the pillows.
He was a professional killer.
Miriam Nelson is a lively 81-year-old who has recently lost her husband of 59 years, and she moves into a residence, actually an open community residence, with her daughter and grandson just down the street.
Her daughter was really happy that her mom was going to be relatively nearby and feel secure in that facility. I'm Dr. Joni Johnston, a clinical and forensic psychologist and private investigator, and I spend most of my time evaluating violent offenders. North Dallas really was a wonderful place to live. If you were a senior citizen and you were looking for companionship and you were looking for comfort, they had a number of upscale living facilities. But they really did understand, I think, their clientele and who they were attracting, and they really did cater to that particular group. And in particular, I think they really understood the social needs of this group and how important it was and how advantageous it was to be around people who were your age, who had similar life experiences, who were interested in a lot of the same things. And this attracted many people to go live at some of these facilities.
These independent living centers are great for people, especially that don't have a lot of family. And you're with your peers for the most part. They organize all kinds of recreation, whether it be doing Tai Chi or going out for lunch or going to the theater. They're very good at keeping an active schedule, to justify the amount of money that they charge for these places. And obviously, the more expensive the place, probably the more bells and whistles.
These were not cheap facilities we're talking about. Some of them rented apartments for $4,000 a month. Some of them required buy-in of as much as $1 million.
She had just had some groceries delivered, and she got a knock on her door. So she goes to the door, opens the door, and there's a man saying, I'm checking for leaks.
He's a smartly dressed man, but he's wearing a rather incongruous pair of gloves that seem at odds with the rest of his outfit. I'm Professor Donna Youngs. I am what's known as an investigative psychologist. Although she asks for ID, he has no ID to present, but she's suspicious. Something doesn't feel right.
I'm Lisa Olson, and I'm an investigative reporter. She calls the front desk while he's in the apartment and tries to reach someone and leaves a long voicemail saying, "Did you send anyone to look for leaks?" No one answers her phone call right away, but he leaves, probably because she was on the cell phone, right? So she gets very spooked by that because eventually she is told that there was no one sent to check for leaks.
After he left, she noticed that a necklace was missing. And she talked to her daughter, and her daughter was also concerned to the point that her grandson came just to make her feel at ease and also to make sure that she was safe.
Miriam's grandson stays at night and waits till she feels a little more reassured. After he moves out, Miriam is found dead at her apartment. And what's more, the family discovered that there's more than $11,000 worth of jewellery missing.
In 2016, something really unusual happened in these living communities, starting at a place called Edgemere. In a 3-month period of time, there were 3 unexpected deaths in this community. And there was jewelry missing after each of these deaths. And it was very unusual that you would have 3 people in this community die within that period of time. As a matter of fact, the security guard asked his manager at one point, how common is it to have somebody die unexpectedly? And the manager said, well, the last time it happened was 7 years ago.
We're talking sudden deaths of relatively healthy women, none of whom had time to even call 911 or call a family member and say, I'm not feeling well. They just all suddenly keeled over. So there was some really mysterious things going on there. He tells police that he was at these facilities because he worked as a caregiver and that he was constantly looking for new clients. So he claimed to just be, door knocking or approaching people looking for clients.
They warned him and essentially said, we're not going to take you in now, but don't come back. Here's your warning. And yet, it wasn't that long later that he's spotted again. And they call the police, and at that point, he is arrested. Billy Chemirmir was born and grew up in Kenya. His father was a well-respected member of his village. He had 3 wives, and Billy's mom was his second wife. He had 28 siblings.
Billy Chemirmir cared for his elderly father back in Kenya, taking care of him until he was 100 years old. And this will have given him experience of understanding and dealing with much older people, but it will also have made him very aware of just how vulnerable elderly people can be.
He was sponsored by one of his sisters who already lived in Texas, and he got a green card. So he had been living here legally as a legal permanent resident. And he was working, he was doing different kinds of jobs. One of his siblings owned an elder care facility, and he became a person who cared for the elderly. He did home health care.
He would look for either jobs working for another company, a healthcare company, and if he didn't feel like he was getting paid properly or appreciated, he would go off and look for his own clients. My name is Mitchell P. Roth. I'm a professor of criminal justice and criminology at Sam Houston State University. It seemed like he was more in the service side of things. He didn't have any type of medical training.
He spends, I think, 12 days in jail. He's finally released on good behavior. People are dying unexpectedly. They have no medical problems. Many of them have clean bills of health. They're active, they're spry, and yet they are all of a sudden found dead. Doris Gleason was a 92-year-old widow. She had been married to the same man for over 60 years. She lost him in 2015, which was just devastating for her. And it really took her a while to start wearing colors again, and probably to feel like she had color back in her life again. But slowly over time, she really rallied and blossomed. She really enjoyed living there. She began doing Tai Chi again. She was a sit and sew club. She developed lots of friends, and she was really enjoying her experience there.
Her daughter, Shannon, was coming to pick her up as she always did. So when Doris is not outside waiting to go to church, her daughter goes in right away. Finds her mother dead. And she's very, very shocked.
There is a laptop computer that's open, and there is a chair that's kind of been pulled out. And it looks like her mom had been doing something perhaps on the computer and just collapsed on the floor and died.
Shannon had lost her sister in a really very sad way. Her sister had died of cancer, and her mom and she had really, really been very, very close. And they wore matching necklaces that had guardian angels, and the guardian angels had been given to them by Shannon's sister before she died. And they were very distinctive. Those were very, very important things to them, both sentimentally and in almost a spiritual way.
She is so certain that her mom would never take that necklace off that she calls Dallas police and she reports a robbery. So the crime scene unit comes out and they do an investigation. And as part of their investigation, Doris's daughter realizes that $10,000 worth of jewelry is missing from her mother's apartment.
What started to happen was the facility managers and employees said, well, you know, maybe we're having these people dying and missing jewelry because the EMTs are taking it. Maybe that's what's happening. The Dallas police send a detective, but not a regular burglary detective or a homicide detective. They send a detective specifically to look at whether firefighters and EMTs are taking jewelry from elderly women at this facility. So they question people who tried to save these women's lives or tried to revive them. They're all cleared, and then pretty much the investigation is closed. The police did not want to believe that there could be a serial killer stalking elderly women.
At least 4 of them live on the same floor. They actually call themselves the 4th floor girls. Many of them are very close friends with each other. And so some of them start becoming alarmed. You know, one of the ladies tells her daughter they're dropping like flies. You have individuals, particularly the ones who are living in these retirement communities, who feel like they're safe. They're not on guard. They're not necessarily concerned about somebody breaking into their apartment. So they're feeling safe and they're trusting the facility to keep them safe. And so I think they're vulnerable in that way.
There were odd things like the victims lining up in a very straight line. There were quite a few people who were laid out in very straight lines, either on their bed or on the floor. And that suggested that in a way that they had been posed. It could have caused a death investigator, if they'd been really attentive, to maybe ask a few more questions. Every single one of the 8 sudden deaths that occur within a 3-month span were accompanied by valuable pieces of jewelry that were missing, and in most cases were reported stolen almost right away by the family members. And these were things like always worn wedding rings. They were, lockets that were given to people by their children that they never took off.
But none of this was taken particularly seriously. None of this threw up red flags for the investigators. It was all just dismissed. The way that we understand elderly behaviour is sometimes not as systematic and organised as might be.
If you look back and you look at the fact of who went to each of these crime scenes, it was different patrolmen.
So the investigators going to the crime scene are dealing with the offences as one-offs. They're not looking for a serial killer.
If, say, the same detective had gone to these different scenes, an astute detective probably would have figured out. But we're talking about a period, at least in Dallas, when there was a tremendous manpower shortage. There weren't a lot of homicide detectives. Homicide detectives did not go to most of these scenes.
We've got separate jurisdictions, the police investigators not working together at all. And we've got a way of murdering people, a modus operandi adopted that is not immediately obvious. And as such, I think that an investigator going to the crime scene, going to the scene of the death, would automatically adopt a narrative of a natural death. We know that investigators have a tendency to classify very quickly the type of case that they're dealing with.
It is almost impossible, really, to logically and rationally explain and this not be investigated more seriously. Yeah, you can say, okay, well, it's because these women were old. That's exactly why I think these cases were not investigated more thoroughly. Because even if you accept that and kind of go, okay, this person might have been 87 or 91, it's important to look at that individual. What is their health history? What are their routines?
There weren't death investigations. There was just a presumption that an older person just died. We know that there was just kind of an unspoken rule in the ME's office that they weren't going to really do too much if the person was over 65. And I think it was even more of the case when a patrolman was called to a place like this. They just assumed it would have to be an accident or a natural death, because so many of them are, and it probably was an unpleasant task they didn't look forward to, but they didn't apply the same rigor that they would have if it had been a younger person.
I think you have this bias among everybody about what it means to be old and what it means when you die when you're old.
Serial killers always have a pattern, the types of victims, the method of killing them, their method of getting away, their method of getting to the victim or stalking the victim. You have all of these things, and it might be recognized in one police department, but this was not relayed to another police department that's investigating a murder at another complex. So these things tend to, link up, but it takes, really good police work and police communication to do that.
I've looked a lot into civil rights cases, corruption. This is kind of a story, sort of a nexus between some of my interests, because I saw it as a civil rights story as well as a criminal justice story involving the human rights of the victims. Were these victims treated fairly because of their age, or were they discriminated against? You can see how maybe a patrolman might have missed it, but how many cases could they miss? How many times did then the ME look at those cases from the same addresses? And we're not talking about a small ME's office, we're talking about an ME's office that would have a database where they would notice that there were lots of unexplained natural deaths at the same facility.
Mary. She was a mother of 6. She was a grandmother. She was a great-grandmother. But probably the most significant thing about Mary is the fact that she lived her faith. Every single day, she would get up, she'd read her Bible, she would pray. She was truly a woman of faith.
She does not know that there's a guy knocking on doors saying, I'm checking for leaks. Management hasn't provided this information. And when she opens the door, she sees the gloves, she realizes she's made a mistake.
Her friends are walking to her door to pick her up to go to the exercise class with them. When they notice her door open, they go into the apartment and find Mary lying on the floor, and she's unconscious, and her friends are trying to revive her, but they can't revive her. One of the friends is a nurse, and she tries to conduct CPR, but still they can't bring Mary back to consciousness, so they contact the emergency services.
Mary has a pacemaker, so there's a miracle. Mary Bartell, this woman of faith, survives. She wakes up in the hospital, and the first thing she notices is that both her wedding ring and a beautiful second ring that she wears on her right hand are gone. Both gifts from her husband, things she never took off. And crucifixes that she also wore are gone. And so one of her sons gets a police officer to come over, and the police officer is very skeptical. And here we have a living victim. The police officer initially says to her sons, you know, it sounds like your mom is delusional. You know, does she have trouble keeping track of reality? She was someone who helped finally convince Plano police that there really was a serial killer, that this guy was real, this was someone they could catch. She's almost immediately told to lie down on her bed, and the man puts a pillow over her face, and she thinks she's going to die. Plano police have figured out that this is an attempted murder. They have an MO, then they start to slowly connect it to others. It's after 24 murders that they finally figure out how he's killing people and not leaving obvious signs of a murder. It is harder, you know, to determine that someone has been smothered to death by a pillow. It did mimic a natural death. He was good at trying to mimic natural death in the way he did this. They find that there is a guy who was hanging out in the parking lot for hours in a gray car, seeming to look at the people going in and out of their apartments.
The son of the resident approaches this man, and the man explains that he's simply looking for work. But the son is not convinced.
He makes a point of noticing this man's car, the model and the make, and he actually jots down the license plate of this car, and he reports it. There's a Plano detective who is also looking at the jewelry angle. And so he is looking at all these resale jewelry sites, and he comes across this one called Offer Up. And he sees a picture of a ring for sale that looks very, very similar to the ring that Mary Bartell was wearing. He contacts the seller, and the seller tells him that he got this ring from a man he met at a coffee shop. And this detective is like a dog on a bone. I mean, he is determined to find out what the scoop is. So he goes to this coffee shop, and he notices that there is a diamond and gold exchange right next door. So he walks next door, he talks to the owner of this diamond and gold exchange, and he flashes Billy Chemirmir's picture. And this man says, I absolutely know this person. This person has been in here multiple times. So now the pieces are now starting to fit together. And this is the beginning of the end for Billy Chemirmir. In 2010, he had a DUI, and then again in 2011, he received another DUI. And then in 2012, he was arrested in a domestic violence situation where he attacked his live-in girlfriend at the time and really assaulted her. He hit her with a pot and kicked her and took a knife and began stabbing the seat next to them.
What's kind of curious is, as a legal permanent resident, you can be deported if you're arrested even for a misdemeanor involving violence or a crime of moral turpitude, and he had been arrested for both.
Chemirmir probably knew that with his criminal history, he couldn't pass a background check. And so what he did was he used his cousin's credentials.
He apparently was able to pass the background checks that were done for him to be employed. He also presented that ID to police when he was arrested for trespassing. So now not only was he a trespasser, but he was also someone who was walking around with a fake ID. I think if the police had been paying more attention and maybe had a little bit more manpower, perhaps they could have made the connection right there at Edgemere.
He was a rather innocuous presence. He was an allowed person. He didn't draw attention to himself. He knew how to conduct himself in the settings that he was, looking for victims. He knew what to wear. He knew the nomenclature that's probably used in the health industry. And he realized, too, that after a series of deaths, it's best to find another hunting ground.
Some families went to civil attorneys, filed lawsuits saying, we were not told about these other crimes. We could have taken precautions to help protect our parents or protect our parents' property. And the civil attorneys start to determine that there's evidence of murder even before the Dallas police or the Plano police do. And in fact, in some cases, some of these places appeared to have concealed things that they had found out from residents. They concealed that there had been strings of crimes. They concealed that Chemirmir had been stopped as an intruder inside some of their facilities. In one case, management took down flyers that one woman's daughter had put up to warn people about a man who had been knocking on doors and saying, "I'm looking for leaks." Plano police send a whole unit to the apartment associated with this car that they've linked to Chemirmir. And they're waiting there for him when he drives in. And he stops at the dumpster, which is not what most people do, and dumps something into the dumpster, not a bag of trash, but what looks like a box. And then he comes in to his parking spot, and then they surround him and they arrest him.
They find a treasure trove of evidence, both in his car and the dump site. One of the things they find in this dumpster is they find this red, kind of ornate, almost Asian-looking, really beautiful jewelry box that has kind of been thrown away. And when they open this jewelry box, they find the name of Lou Ty Harris in there. And they are very concerned about what has happened to this woman.
Lou Tai Harris was a Vietnamese woman who met an American soldier during the war. They married and moved to the United States. Now, to all accounts, Lou Tai was a hoot. She was great fun, and one of her particular quirks was that she kept in her purse at all times $2 bills that she would give out as gifts to people. Plano police are incredibly concerned, and they race to her house, a private residence, but the house is not within their jurisdiction, so Plano police have to wait for Dallas police to arrive. Once Dallas police arrive, they knock down the door, break down the door, and Lou Tai is found dead on the floor inside. Now, Dallas police are ready to write this off as a natural death. Plano police insist that Dallas police look at the pillowcase.
They tell them, if you think that this is not a murder, go into the bedroom, look at the pillowcase, and you're going to see lipstick on it.
They believe that this is a killer who attacks people with a pillow, because they know that from Mary Bartell.
When Dallas police look at the pillow, they see makeup all over the pillow. Clear evidence that she's been suffocated with that pillow.
When they saw that, they either looked at the Plano police and thought, boy, these guys are like Sherlock Holmes, or kind of it woke them up from their stupor of how they've been investigating these or not investigating these crimes.
So that's the big break in the case, where they discover a murder that no one knew even occurred. I do think that if Plano police had not brought the information there about Mary Bartell, there's almost no doubt that Lou T. Harris's death would have been ruled to be a natural death, just like all the others.
Billy Chemirmir was a predator, really, who was hunting a specific victim. And what he looked for was a vulnerable woman. So a woman who was walking alone, she might have a dog with her, she might have a walker, she might be somebody who needed a little bit of extra time getting up the stairs.
The way that Chemirmir worked was very predatory, was very instinctive, his style of offending. He knew how to target the most vulnerable and yet lucrative of victims. There's an almost, as I say, a predatory, animalistic way in which he selects his victims.
I think the investigators in this case, from all the different counties, must have felt so many different emotions as the evidence began to pile up. So, I mean, I think it must have been a very, very difficult awakening in terms of seeing that this is somebody who had been killing for 2 years and had killed over 20 women and 1 man, and who had done it with impunity. And there had been a number of signs in terms of the crimes, family members and their thoughts, missing jewelry, and there were even some pretty good physical signs of foul play at some of these apartments, and yet they were overlooked. And it was almost like, I think there must have been this recognition that this confirmation bias had just taken place over and over again, where once it was kind of decided that this is an elderly person, this was a natural death. Billy Chemirmir never confessed to anything. As a matter of fact, some of the detectives were astonished in that they said, we literally laid out evidence after evidence after evidence, video footage, pieces of jewelry that we knew belonged to certain people. And he would sit there and just in the face of all this evidence, just say, I didn't do it. I wasn't there. He just sat there and said, I wasn't raised this way. This isn't me. I'm not a murderer.
He claimed that he had come by the jewelry of murdered women in various mysterious ways, and that he had not ever robbed anyone, nor killed anyone, nor would he, because as an African and a man who had a father who was a chief, that he revered elders, and he couldn't imagine that.
The police charged him formally with the murder, and they decided to charge him with Lou Harris's murder because they felt like it was the strongest case. I mean, he essentially was almost caught in the act. You know, not of murdering her, but literally throwing her jewelry box away. And he had her jewelry in his possession. They know that he stalked her from Walmart. They were able to go and pull the Walmart footage. I mean, there was very little doubt that this person had murdered Lou Ty Harris. The prosecutors were extremely optimistic. They felt like they had a slam dunk case. As a matter of fact, the prosecutor told the jury that this should take you less time than it might to pick the jury foreman.
But in reality, human beings are very complicated people. And getting 12 people in a jury to agree, sometimes it can be very difficult. And one of the individuals on the jury didn't agree, so it was 11-1, and so the judge was forced to call a mistrial. And you can only imagine the reaction of the family members.
It was just horror and shock, and the thought that he might even be released was terrifying to them.
And of course, immediately the prosecutors say, we're going to try this again. But it was just completely mind-boggling to everybody involved because of the level of evidence against him. I tend to think he saw being in the home health care industry as a relatively easy way to find and take advantage of vulnerable people who needed him and who he could then take advantage of.
Each serial killer has a certain motivation. It's not murder without motive as it used to be seen. And so in this particular case, it's clear that it's murder for profit because he's taking things from them. He's not doing anything else with the bodies besides, just trying to leave them in an unobtrusive manner so that, people, just say, oh, they died, and that's that.
I think underlying the greed, there was a festering resentment towards older people, a resentment that has its roots way back in his childhood when Billy was just one of a huge family with 28 siblings and a very significant, powerful, respected tribal leader father. A father that he could never live up to. And I think that these murders gave him the opportunity, finally, to be the powerful one.
I do think his primary motivation was money, and I think he killed the victims to prevent them from identifying him. They were almost like collateral damage to him. He wanted to get the money, and this was an easy way to do it in his mind. And if he had to, kill an old person, well, that was kind of the cost of doing business for him.
Billy Chemirmir saw this as a job. He saw this as the way he made money. He was clearly sociopathic. He had apparently no conscience at all. He had certainly forsaken his upbringing, which was to revere elders. He saw these people as commodities and their things as things that he deserved to have so that he could sell them. To me, that's a real tragedy, that someone would devalue the lives of other human beings to that point, that he would see them as only a way for him to make money. He was an organized serial killer, as the FBI would say. He had a disguise. He had a kit he brought. He had his gloves. He had his fake toolbox. He had his costume. He had his method. He would knock on the door. He would pre-case and find the women. This suggests somebody who had been at this for a very long time.
Billy was sentenced to life in prison, and they put him in with another murderer. Turns out that they weren't the best of company, and Billy must have said something that really bothered the other inmate, or at least that's what the inmate would later say, and he basically stabbed him and bludgeoned him to death. He essentially got the death penalty. This was one of those cases where he should have had some type of protection, because it was well known that who he was targeting was elderly people, and there is kind of a code of the convict that you don't hurt the powerless, you don't take advantage of the powerless. So he was pretty low on the murder behind bars ladder of life, basically. Most people have never heard of Billy Chemirmir, and most people will never hear of him unless they, study healthcare killers. The media wasn't as interested in him. They're more interested when there's more of a sexual component involved as well. A burglary is not that sexy a type of crime. Killing an elderly person is terrible, but again, you're looking at somebody that, because of ageism, is become invisible in our society. And that's just the nature of the beast.
3 of these facilities that have had major civil lawsuits against them now, where the former residents' children have alleged, you failed in your duty to just provide basic information to your residents about dangers that were identified or should have been identified by your staff. Seniors deserve better places to live where the standards are higher. Seniors deserve better death investigations. We can't just ignore something like this. We have to learn from what Billy Chemirmir did. We have to do better at protecting seniors.